This is Leafs Morning Take with Nick Alberga and Jay Rosehill.
Now we've got a fight started here right off the bat with Rosehill.
30 minutes of live, nonstop Leafs talk starts now.
Well, another Maple Leaf season may have ended, but our work has just begun. Presented by Botano, it's the Monday edition of Leafs Morning Take. Nick Alberga with you. Jay Rosehill will drop by in about 5 minutes for another installment of 3 Hits with Rosey. Today's guest, longtime NHL broadcaster / insider, host of the Bob McCown Show on YouTube, John Shannon, will drop by in about 10 from now as the postmortem begins on another disappointing finish to a Maple Leaf season, folks. Unfortunately, I think the writing was a bit on the wall. Down 0-3 in that series. Only 4 teams had ever done it in Stanley Cup playoff history. We all probably knew this day was coming. And already the news is coming out. It's locker room cleanout day, by the way. We'll have full reaction to that coming up tomorrow. The one peculiar thing and the interesting thing, I guess, is that Brendan Shanahan will not be addressing the media today. So I'll talk to John Shannon about that coming up. Kyle Dubas will talk. Sheldon Keefe will talk. Some of the players have already spoken. Others later on. But the first piece of news earlier this morning, Frank Saravalli, our great insider over at Daily Faceoff, says he hears the Flames plan to pursue permission to interview Leafs assistant GM Brandon Pridham for their GM vacancy. So make of that what you will. You know, I think it's way too early in the process to decipher what this means in the long haul for the Maple Leafs. So from that perspective, I think the writing has been on the board when it comes to Brandon Pridham. And I don't know if the Leafs are going to get in his way either in terms of having conversations with other teams, because obviously this would be a promotion. Unless, who knows what happens with Kyle Dubas, and maybe Pridham's involved in that scenario too. So that is the latest, and that was pre to the conversations with all the players and everybody, locker room cleanout day for the Maple Leafs. Lather, rinse, repeat is sort of the theme of today's show, because we've done so many of these where it's like, oh, that wasn't good enough. And I won't lie, I just don't like some of the quotes coming out of the locker room. Like John Tavares keeps talking about belief. And maybe they're at a point where they just have no clue what to say. Maybe that's just it, but some of the quotes, you're like, my goodness, just don't say anything at this point. Like, you're telling me there's belief in that locker room. There's belief in my life when I wake up every day. What's the difference? But anyways, remember to subscribe, tap that like button, leave us a review wherever you're checking us out, at the Leafs Nation 401 on YouTube. Again, at the Leafs Nation 401 on YouTube. Available wherever you find your podcasts as well. So just search us. You'll be able to find us, subscribe away, like away, and give us some feedback. And don't forget to visit theleafsnation.com for the very latest in all things Toronto Maple Leafs. Thoughts, comments, questions, or concern. You can drop us a line in the chat down below here on YouTube. We'll get to it a bit later on in the show. So Rosie's coming up, John Shannon as well. But for now, let's get over the boards. Yep, it's got that hollow sadness feel here on this Monday, albeit it's been, a couple days since Friday, and Nick Cousins scores that OT winner to send the Florida Panthers to the third round for the first time since 1996, when they lost, of course, in the Stanley Cup final to the Colorado Avalanche. But just the breakdown of this play, and I just can't get over the fact that everybody just continuing to complain about officiating. It's happening in Edmonton right now after the loss last night. I know there's a missed call in Ekholm. I know Gudas sort of holds on to the stick there of Calle Yarncroke. But if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. Not to, pin everything on that. But I think it's such a lazy narrative, a lazy excuse this time of year. Because your team loses, you try to blame and put everything on the officials. Bottom line, they lost this series in Game 3, folks. So while we think that goal went in, whatever, the Leafs shouldn't have been in that predicament. They shouldn't have lost Game 3 the way they did, and shouldn't have been down 3-0 in that series. That's as far as I'm concerned. I don't think the officiating has been great, but there's no way in my world, even in my sadistic world, that I'd pin everything on the officiating. I think that was part of the story, but not everything. I think the Leafs team deserved what they got in 5 games in that series. The core 3 goals in 5 games. To me, unequivocally, that is the biggest story of the season and the series. Nothing for Austin Matthews, nothing for John Tavares, 1 for Marner, and 2 for Willie Nylander, by the way, who was outstanding in Game 5. I think it's just going to be so hard to trade Willie Nylander if that does come to fruition this offseason. I don't see a scenario, even if he's a year away from UFA. I think you have to find a way to re-sign Willie, because, again, another postseason goes by, and I think he was one of Toronto's better players, at least more consistent players in terms of the big boys and showing up when it mattered most. The other takeaway was how putrid they were on home ice. Like Rosie and I talked about it all season long, how, you want to make Scotiabank Arena a house of pain. You want home ice advantage. You want this, you want that. and they come out in the Stanley Cup playoffs and go 1-5 at Scotiabank Arena. So, like, what's the point of home ice if you can't take care of business? And certainly along those lines, that has been the theme, that has been the trend here in the Stanley Cup playoffs. It's been the postseason of the road team. We saw it again last night with the Vegas Golden Knights going into Edmonton in Game 6 and pulling out a victory. But I thought that was a glaring thing for me, is Toronto's home record, 1-5. The power play stunk up the joint again, only 11 power plays in 5 games. And again, I don't want to get into the officiating conversation, but the Leafs power play always seems to be a juggernaut in the regular season. It gets to the playoffs, and when it matters the most, they're just not there. They were 2 for 11. Same goes for the offense, by the way. I talked about this over the weekend. If you checked out our bonus material available at the Leafs Nation 401, I talked about the offense going dry, just the worst time imaginable. And it happens every year. They scored 14 goals total in their last 7 games of the Stanley Cup playoffs. 2 goals a game. Like, that's insane to me when you look at the firepower on this roster. On a daily basis, we talk about the Leafs, how they're a juggernaut. They score goals like crazy. Then it gets to the most important games of the season, and nowhere to be found. So again, I'll have full reaction with Rosey coming out tomorrow from locker room cleanout day. No Brendan Shanahan, but Dubas will speak. Sheldon Keefe will speak. And now we're going to hear somebody else speak who has a lot on their mind the last couple of days, and that is Jay Rosehill. 3 hits with Rosey.
Hey guys, welcome back to 3 Hits. Today I'm touching on the 3 things that I think the Toronto Maple Leafs need to address as soon as possible. These are going to be the things that determines the direction that this team goes and what next year is going to look like ultimately. And while not getting into it too heavily, I'm sure that's what we're going to do in the next weeks and months to come, is break down all of these different categories and figure out what they need to do, and if they do make moves, figure out what those look like now. But number one, I think we need to figure out what to do with the general manager and the head coach. Is Kyle Dubas going to return? Is Sheldon Keefe going to return? Are they both going to be gone? Is one going to return and not the other? If so, who, why, and what does that look like? So I think that needs to be handled first and foremost before they start figuring out what direction they're going to go, and I imagine that is on the minds of the powers that be. Number 2, I think they need to figure out what to do with the core 4. Who do you stay with? Who do you invest in? Who do you think is going to take you to the next level, and who's holding you back from getting there? And those are tough questions. I don't think anyone knows the answer, but I do think that it is now proven to most people that this group isn't made to succeed in playoff hockey. They're lacking somewhere. And I think that in order to get the team that you want and to fix the problems, you have to dismantle in some way, shape, or form the core 4. Who that is, I don't know. Again, that's what we're going to be getting into in weeks to come, but something that needs to be addressed. And in my mind, the sooner the better. Obviously, with free agency coming up in July 1st, is a time to make some moves, trade some people around, and I don't know, what can you get for certain players, and who wants them, and what is their value, and what will you have to pay them if they stay? So many questions. Be a good time to get Frank Saravalli on when we're talking about that, because he is the man with those types of things. Number 3, they got to figure out what to do with Matt Murray. I mean, can you just send him to the minors? Can you keep him on long-term IR? Has there ever been a scenario where a guy is healthy and they're kind of convincing him to just stay on long-term IR? Is that even legal? What are the ramifications of any decisions made with Matt Murray? Because I'm quite sure in my mind that they are going to go with Ilya Samsonov and Woll in this tandem for the Toronto Maple Leafs goaltending situation. I mean, Matt Murray, if he's proven anything this year, he's just proven that he's not reliable to stay healthy. And it's probably as frustrating to him as anyone else in the world. And you feel for the guy. When he's healthy, he tends to be able to play some good hockey. Won some games for us this year, but he just can't stay healthy. And you can't keep, a guy of, with his salary of any kind on roster if he's just not going to be playing any games. And I believe that we've found an up-and-coming talent with Woll in net. I think he proved himself in the second round of the playoffs there. So that's the direction I think they're going to go. But what exactly does that look like for Matt Murray? Where does he end up? Where does he go? And what does this look like? I believe is going to be pretty interesting coming down the pipe. So time will tell. Again, we're going to be breaking these things down on Leafs Morning Take just about daily like we have been, and send us your opinions, send us your thoughts on these kind of categories, and see what these guys need to do, because there's no doubt that this time of year when things don't go well, the wheels start turning and people want to see some change. So we'll see if that happens.
Jay Rosehill, once again and again, if you want to check out an epic rant, go over to our YouTube page at the Leafs Nation 401 for the very latest on that. And Rosie had some choice words following the Game 5 loss. We put together a video on Friday, hit some traction a bit on social media over the weekend, so make sure to go check that out. But the fallout does just begin here on this Monday on Leafs Morning Take. So happy to bring in longtime NHL broadcaster / insider, co-host of the Bob McCown Show. It's John Shannon. John, how are you, buddy? I'm fantastic. So first question, Toronto or Edmonton, bigger disappointment?
Well, I'll tell you what, on Friday it was Toronto and on Sunday it was Edmonton. I think that there was some real belief that once the Boston Bruins were eliminated, Toronto had an easier path to get to the Stanley Cup final. And the way the Oilers looked against Los Angeles, and really in many ways had the game under control in Game 3 in Vegas, I think there was a real thought that that they were destined to go to the Stanley Cup final too. So to me, I would almost give it a tie. You know, the fan bases of both teams are so passionate about what their teams do. They have elite players, and I think the disappointment in Edmonton is matched only by the disappointment in Toronto.
What's your sense as to what's happening behind the scenes right now in Toronto?
Well, I think it's far too soon to think that we're going to have a verdict in the next 24 hours. I think it's important to think that this goes all the way to the board. We have it. It's funny, Nick, 15 years ago, everything revolved around what the board said, what the board did. And you know, we always talked about the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund and their control of this club, and they didn't understand what it was like to play the game. And what Brendan Shanahan did in a magnificent way was to take the pressure off the board. And he deserves credit for that. He put a face to the franchise. So the question becomes is if the board sits down, and the board is Rogers, Bell, and two people representing Larry Tannenbaum's company. If that's the case, is Brendan Shanahan given a vote of confidence in order to try to reinvent the team? Or just say, hey, status quo, Brendan, you keep doing what you want to do? Or does the board sit back and say, you know what, this is really disappointing again, and we have to reevaluate not just what happens on the hockey operations side, but we have to manage what Brendan Shanahan does too. And that I think I'm not suggesting that there's an impending meeting, but I think that discussion will probably happen at some point amongst the board members to figure out what the heck's going to go on with the Maple Leafs.
Because I think that was my fascination. And again, as we have this conversation, it's locker room cleanout day for the Maple Leafs. But that was my fascination with the fact that Brendan Shanahan would not be addressing the media on Monday. Are we reading too much into that? Like, what do you make of that whole situation?
I think we are. I think today is, the hard and fast rule that you have to hear from the players as they put their stuff into green garbage bags. And then, you should hear from Sheldon one more time, who now has 72 hours to reflect on what happened in Game 5. And, whether Kyle is going to say anything cryptic or Kyle's going to say anything that is mandatory listen is another interesting thing. I can almost bet, though, that he will come across as intelligent. He will come across as compassionate. He will come across as somebody who understands what this team needs. And then we'll figure out what happens in the next week or two.
I'm sure you guys will have the conversation on your show, and make sure to go check that out if you're watching or listening right now with Bob McCown. But like, what happens now? Because even talking to friends and other media members the last couple of days, people are already pitching like names like Tom Wilson. Like, in your opinion, what you saw here in the Stanley Cup playoffs, what needs to happen next from the Maple Leafs perspective?
Well, the one thing that we this the insanity of beating your head against the wall for the last few years, if you're a Toronto Maple Leaf fan, is you've got to understand that the playoffs are that much different than the regular season. And do you have a team built for the Stanley Cup playoffs? Do you have enough grit? Do you have enough depth in your roster to play for the Stanley Cup? I mean, I think the best example right now of the, how many teams are left? Seven, six, five. Yeah, five. Yeah. That's right. 5 teams left. I think the best examples are Seattle and Vegas. And why are they that way? Well, they're relentless. Both teams are relentless. Both teams are deep, and both teams have really strong defenses. So, okay, that's a pretty good blueprint to start with. If I would have told you that, sure the top 6 forwards in Toronto are outstanding, but are they deeper than the Seattle Kraken or the Vegas Golden Knights? Deeper? 12 guys in? I think you might have a question mark. You might say, well, it's pretty darn close. I mean, the thing with Seattle and Vegas is that you can't match lines because they just roll them and they all look the same. So that's Stanley Cup playoff hockey. You look at the strength of what has happened in Vegas with Alex Pietrangelo and Alec Martinez and Braden McNabb. That is a really big, heavy defense. Shea Theodore when he's 100% healthy. Do the Maple Leafs have a defense that good? No, they don't. So those are the blueprints that I think you have to start to work with, and you have to say, okay, the 82 games are fun. It's great, and it's great to go to the game on Wednesday night or Saturday night and have a good time, a social out. But do you want to win the Stanley Cup or do you want to win the regular season? Nobody walks down the street and says, there goes the President's Trophy winning team. There's no parade. And so I think there has to be a paradigm shift in how you build your hockey club in order to win playoff games. And I think Kyle thought he's done that. I think Kyle thinks he's done that a couple of times. He always does the same thing at the deadline. He goes out and tries to find leadership and gritty players. But it's too late by that, because it's a culture thing too, I think. I think there's something to be said for that. And so there has to be a change in the blueprint somehow, some way. And hopefully Kyle gets a chance. In my opinion, I hope Kyle gets a chance to do the blueprint. But, I think everything's on the table right now.
Oh, without question. I think the other thing I noticed of the teams remaining is you look at the trade deadline, all this conversation about the New York Rangers, the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Boston Bruins, and it's, more times than not, especially this year, it's the teams that really didn't do much. Remember how much flack the Carolina Hurricanes did outside of Shane Gostisbehere, they were really, really quiet. Maybe it shows you that I think we overvalue to an extent the trade deadline. But to me, that's the big conversation, certainly in this market, the core.
You think?
Yeah. Yeah, no,
we fall for it every year, Nick. We fall for it every year because it's cool. Guys getting traded. Wow, that's cool. We live in the aura of Butch Goring. That was a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
That was 42 years ago. Come on. There's something to be said for building a culture from September, not from March 3rd.
So I love to point fingers on this show. Blame. Like, it's going to be a big word used throughout this week. Who deserves, most or the brunt of the blame in John Shannon's world for this loss here against Florida?
I think the core 4 do. I really do. I think the 4 players do. They're the ones that are on the front line. They're the ones that are getting paid the big money. They're the ones that the expectation is that, if you can score 40 goals in the regular season, you should be able to score goals in the playoffs. Now, without making excuses, and hopefully we'll find out today more information, but who played hurt and how hurt were they? We all know that everybody's sore. We all know that there's bumps and bruises, but is there a wrist that's with a hairline fracture? This is the hard part of judging and making judgment calls in a scenario like this, Nick, where
Mm-hmm.
you get angry with the players because, come on, why can't they do it? What's wrong? And then we find out later, well, he was playing with, 2 broken toes, and it's hard to skate. It's hard to get your boot on. And I'm waiting to hear that. It in many ways, and I said this to somebody about Edmonton yet last night. They said, "Do you think anybody's hurt?" I said, "I hope so. I hope they're hurt because some of them didn't play very well." And I think you almost have to say, is somebody on the Maple Leafs hurt? Well, I almost hope so that there's a built-in excuse, a real reason, not an excuse, a real reason why they weren't able to elevate their game like they did in the regular season.
Yeah, and I think it was just really unfortunate, to your point, that you finally won a playoff series in 19 years, and that's the way you come out for Game 3. Like, they were good in Game 1 and 2. Just the puck bounces, the puck luck didn't go their way, and then they're down 2-0, and then just a complete no-show, John, for
I don't
Game
buy
3.
that.
No?
I don't buy that. I think I heard you say Game 3 was the most important game. Games 1 and 2 set the narrative. Games
Sure.
1 and 2 set the narrative. Why can't they get the puck luck? Why aren't they providing the extra effort to get that break once in a while? That to me, I mean, if you had a choice, let me ask you this question right now.
Yeah.
If you had a choice, dude, Matthew Tkachuk and Austin Matthews, who would you take?
Honestly, probably Tkachuk right now.
Right.
Probably Tkachuk. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, so, well, why? Matthews is bigger. Matthews has a better shot. Matthews is a better skater. But why can't he play like Matthew Tkachuk? That becomes the whole question. And I mean, I've never been a Marner fan all my life, but I'll tell you what, I would never get rid of Mitch Marner. Mitch Marner's the modern day Dave Keon. I think Mitch Marner, you put Marner out on the ice and Marner does exactly what he needs to do every time. He tries his hardest. He leaves it out there. I don't know him as a person, but when you consider that, every scenario the Maple Leafs had something going on, 5-on-5, killing penalties on the power play, Mitch Marner was there, and I would never, ever touch Mitch Marner when it came to this roster.
So let me ask you this. I think the consensus out there's going to be changes. In what way, we don't know just yet. But what's the likelihood the Leafs make a blockbuster trade this summer, in your opinion?
Well, they have to look at it, because I don't think you can go to camp in the middle of September and have that group of players look around the room and say, here we go again. Groundhog Day's in February, not the 15th of September. And so not to beat a dead horse here about Matthews, but what is different about this scenario this summer in Toronto versus what Matthew Tkachuk did in Calgary last summer? Get his in. Do you want to sign here, Austin? Well, I'm not sure. Well, we can't take that risk. You can't take that risk. So that to me is where this all starts. So whether that's a blockbuster or something happens, it all has to start with, what are you going to do with Austin Matthews? Are you going to pay him $14 million? I mean, he's going to be close to that number. It's going to be close to that number. And I think you have to look at this whole thing and say, what does he fit into what we need long term? And if you say, well, sure he does. Look at him, great player. Rocket Richard winner, 60 goals, 40 goals. This is about winning the Stanley Cup. This is not about individual awards. This is not about scoring goals. This is about WINS. And they have to figure out and decide that. They have to figure out, and I'm saying the management of this team has to, and they have to figure out this from the perspective of, do the players really want to win as badly as you do and Jay does and every Maple Leaf fan in town?
Yeah, and all I'll say to wrap too, like, just watching some of these guys go after personal accomplishments late in the regular season had me wondering watching some playoff games. That's all I'll say, John. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, but that's natural in a long season, an 82-game season. It's a long season. But you have to maintain your focus overall. You do. You have to maintain that focus. I mean, here we are. We're talking about one of the greatest Leaf regular season teams of all time, and we're trying to blow it up.
True.
You're trying to blow it
True.
up. And how logical is that? And the only other thing is I would say is from the perspective of people saying, well, we got to get rid of Kyle. Kyle's no good. Kyle can't do this. If not Kyle, then who? That's the other issue. I mean, this is not a great season for available managers. This is not a great season for available coaches. And and I think there's a few teams out there trying to figure that out and finding that out as we speak.
It'll be fascinating for sure. And of course, you got the news about Brandon Pridham. Maybe the Flames going to talk to him, but we'll leave it at that. John, really, really appreciate the time today, bud.
Cheers, Nick. All the best. Good seeing you.
Take care. You too. That's the one and only John Shannon. Had a chance to work with John a couple of years back at Sportsnet. Absolute salt of the earth, and always has an opinion. That's what I love about him, because I always have an opinion as well. And the chat was on fire, so we will get to some of your posts and comments. We hit 500 concurrent viewers today. Appreciate all the support, folks, throughout the postseason. It really, really is disappointing that, we're feeling good about life like 2 weeks ago, and here we are doing sort of a post-mortem. And again, Jay and I will have you covered all the way until free agency, by the way, and then we're going to scale things back in the summer. But make sure to keep a lock to our page at the Leafs Nation 401. The live shows will continue on a daily basis, 11 to 11:30 a.m. Eastern time here on our very own YouTube page. So make sure to subscribe, hammer that like button at the Leafs Nation 401. For now, the Botano wrap-up is presented by Botano.ca. The game starts now, 19 plus. Please play responsibly. And so I'm disappointed that Edmonton series is over, because I was just hammering the first period over, and it hit in all 6 games in that series. But we're going to hammer something else that's hit more. It's hit in 9 straight meetings between Dallas and Seattle, and that is the over 5.5, as you see on your screen right there, -125, courtesy of our friends over at Botano. I have to go all in on this, folks. Like, it's 9 for 9. They've played 9 times this season. The over is hit in all 9 of those games. So let's go for 10 tonight. Easy bet, in my opinion, in terms of making it. If you lose, you lose. The data, the trend, everything tells us that number will hit tonight. And Dallas and Seattle has been a crazy story. So we'll see what's in store for 7th heaven of that game. Pick your winner. But I think I expect, once again, lots of offense. 9 for 9 on the year. Dallas and the Seattle Kraken. It's been pretty mystifying, if you ask me, because I actually labeled that series as something to look at as the under. But it's been anything but. So with that in mind, let's get to the chat, and I'll do my best as I talk to cipher through everything, because there's a lot of you today, and really appreciate all the newcomers. If you're here for the first time, welcome at the Leafs Nation 401, where you can subscribe. This is a safe space, whatever you want to talk about from the Maple Leafs perspective. What should they do in the offseason? Who should they trade? What should they do with Dubas, Keefe, Austin Matthews? Like T-Max TV writes in, Matthews got to go. I don't know if I can get to that sort of level, but a lot of people are throwing different names out there the last couple of days. That is for sure. I think, honestly, the guy I would move is Mitch Marner, and that's taking nothing away from Mitch Marner. I just think I like the way Nylander's been playing. Obviously, he's worth a bit of a boost. You got to re-sign Nylander first and foremost, but I agree with what John Shannon said. Like, everything starts with the Austin Matthews conversation. Then you go from there, because weirdly enough, it could be the guy nobody expects to move that moves in Austin Matthews. Like, I agree with John. If Matthews is like, he's uncertain, there's no way you enter a walk here without a new contract for Austin Matthews. So I think it's going to be very interesting. Having said that, it would be a very difficult move to make for me. But again, there's a lot you can learn from what Calgary happened, and did with Matthew Tkachuk and making that deal. I think there's a lot to learn around this league, and certainly a same type of scenario they find themselves in with Austin Matthews, and to an extent as well, Willie Nylander. But if you're looking to shuffle the deck chairs, so to speak, I think Mitch Marner's that guy. And I expect, a flurry of activity for this team once again this summer. But the other thing is like, they got to figure out what they're doing with Kyle Dubas. They got to figure out Sheldon Keefe and then work accordingly from there. But like, there's a lot to be handled in terms of offseason activity with this team. This chat's just moving so fast. It's tough to keep up. Can you do sign and trades, Daniel, in the NHL? Yes, you can. It's just worded a bit differently. Clay cut Jonathan Taves to the Leafs. Unlikely. I think if Taves plays, maybe it's Winnipeg. I just don't know how much Jonathan Taves has left. And of course, he's been dealing with illness for a while. So that's another curious conversation. But it's just like it's interesting to me just talking to friends and people like the last couple of days where everybody's talking about the sandpaper, the grit, and I get it. And again, like, Tom Wilson's name's being thrown out there. Number one, who's to say that he's even available? Number two, what would it cost the Maple Leafs? Like, there are just so many moving parts as to what this team needs. And I think I got some clarity on Sunday as well in the fact that it's just so hard to win in this league. Like, you look at that Oilers roster, they were ready to win. The Maple Leafs were ready to win. At the end of the day, people lose sight of the fact there are 31 teams that walk away disappointed with how the season went. And there's one team that wins the Stanley Cup, and they're elated, they're happy, and they're feeling much different. So I think, it's one of those things where you have to put it in perspective. And while it stings right now, you just never know down the road what's going to transpire. But again, the chat's so hot, folks. I can't keep up. A lot of conversation about the Mitch Marner comments from John Shannon. I get that. A lot of the basis, I will say, just to put everything together, is that people are talking about trades. Matthews, Marner, Nylander, what Nylander's meant to this team. Even some Paul Marner conversation. Love that on this show. So appreciate everybody in the chat. And again, it'll help when I have Rosie tomorrow so I can cipher through while Rosie's talking. But keep the heat coming, folks. Like, just tune in tomorrow. Make sure you tune in tomorrow. Jay Rosehill's going to be back under center. I talked to him all weekend. He's still fired up. Again, if you haven't checked out our vids from over the weekend, please do so. Rosie was fired up, very heartfelt, and his rants are just epic. So once again, I'd like to thank John Shannon for coming on today. Producer Alex did a fantastic job. Everybody in the chat, you guys are phenomenal. It's crazy to see how much we've grown in a short period of time doing this show for the very first time this season. And it's been a lot of fun. And again, we have you covered all the way until free agency. I believe we're with you till July 2nd or 3rd, Monday through Friday, 11 to 11:30 a.m. Eastern time live. And then we'll scale things back in the offseason. But again, we want to be your number one destination for all things Toronto Maple Leafs. We've been bringing you the guests. We had Matthew Nyes on this season. We had Luke Shannon a couple times. We're going to have some other big hitters on in the coming weeks as well. Frank Saravalli, who is an asset of ours, we'll bring him on. We'll talk about what's next for this Maple Leafs team. But again, like, the conversation just starts. It starts now after the postmortem began, I guess, late on Friday night. It continues here on this Monday. So tomorrow we'll have full reaction from locker room cleanout day, and we'll get Jay's perspective on where this Maple Leafs team goes from here. So once again, I'm Nick Alberga. Thanks so much for listening and watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like at the Leafs Nation 401. We'll talk on Tuesday. Thanks, everybody.